Hey, what's up, everyone? Sam Shaw here, founder of Wall Street Mastermind. Excited to be back today with another client interview for you guys. Today, we're on with Steven, who is one of our longtime students, actually. I went back and checked on this, but we've been working with Steven for almost 2 years, actually, right? Since your sophomore year.
Hmm.
And he just finished, well, actually, he finished his junior summer internship recruiting a while ago, but he just finished his full time recruiting because he's a senior now and got to a very successful outcome. But also, it's definitely been a very, very long journey for him. I'm sure he'll tell you that himself as well. And I think that's like what happens for most people who go through investment banking recruiting, which is like it's not like an overnight thing, and it's usually like a long, grueling process, right? So
Yeah.
I wanted to get Steven on here to talk to you guys today about his experience going through recruiting and what that was like, and then also hopefully just shed some light for you guys on, you know, how he was able to accomplish what he accomplished, and hopefully you guys get some insights that will help you with your own recruiting process as well. So, Steven, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today, man.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Um,
If you don't mind, just like maybe starting off with like a quick intro of who you are, and we can kind of dive into some questions after that.
yeah, sounds good. So my name is Stephen Liang. I'm currently a senior at UC Berkeley, and I study economics with a minor in data science. I came into college, not really knowing I wanted to do banking. I actually had a more of a marketing background my freshman year, and I was, exploring different majors like computer science. And I probably, if you look back, I wasn't the most strong candidate. I wasn't the strongest candidate. I had a subpar GPA amongst other things, and so that's just a little background about me. But I still made it through the process, and everything worked out.
Yeah. So let's go back to the beginning. Like I said, you joined Wall Street Mastermind in early sophomore year, I believe, or actually like
I
maybe
think it was
not.
like like towards the end of my first semester of sophomore year.
Yeah, it was actually like November, right? I think.
Mhm.
And so prior to that, like when did you first realize you wanted to do investment banking, and what were some of the things that you were doing on your own to work towards that goal?
Yeah. I think when I first I didn't know, like I mentioned earlier, I didn't really know I wanted to do banking. I was talking to a lot of people on around campus, and just kind of asking them, what's like a thing, what's a potential career for me, to like a job that I can get after college. And being part of like involved with the business community, you often hear things like banking, consulting, and some other things. And they explained like what banking was to me, and it sounded pretty interesting. And you have like the really good learning opportunities, the good exit opportunities, and obviously like the pay is like good. And so those things all sounded great to me, and so I kind of started looking more into that. And at first, I had no clue how to go about the whole like preparation process. I was
Mhm.
just kind of asking for like resources, and they sent me some of those guides. And like the MNI 400, the Breaking into Wall Street, or whatever you name it. And it
Yeah.
was a lot of like reading, and it was like pretty dense. And I didn't have any like finance background, and so I was
Mhm.
reading it. It wasn't really like coming to me intuitively, and so it
Yeah.
was pretty. I felt like the first couple, maybe like month or two, I was going through that stuff. It wasn't really getting me anywhere because um, it wasn't like those things. You have to read it a lot, and then you have to internalize the information, and it's not something that was like. I don't think I'm more of like a. I guess I don't know what you call it, like learning from reading things, and so it wasn't really helping me, and so that was just kind of like plateauing until a certain point. And so I was looking for like other possible solution to like kind of help me retain all this information that goes into recruiting.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. So you sounds like you kind of did the probably a very similar thing to most people, which is you first discovered banking probably through just other people at school, most likely upperclassmen. As you learn more about it through them, you realize all the benefits of starting your career in banking, and that's what gets you interested. And then naturally, you ask these people for help. And usually, when you ask upperclassmen for help or advice on recruiting, one of the most likely scenarios is that they'll just point you to some of the popular interview guides out there that they also use themselves. And so
Mhm.
that's kind of how you started this whole process initially.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And then I think another thing is like I wasn't really. in any like, you know, professional fraternities or like finance oriented clubs. And so there weren't that many people that I could kind of have like walk me through like the whole, spend a lot of time with me kind of going through like prep or whatnot. So a lot of it I had to do myself.
Yeah.
And, you know, as I mentioned earlier, like those things, it's like pretty tough. It was tough for me at least to like kind of figure it out myself. I really had no idea how to go about it.
Yeah.
I didn't have like a mentor or anything to kind of say like, oh, this is what you need to do. This is how you maybe network. This is how you study for these types of questions or whatever. And so I was kind of lost in the whole process.
Yeah. Especially, I mean, since I went to Cal myself, I'm actually more familiar with the school, but at a school like Cal, if you're not in Haas, which is the business school, and if you're not in some of these business fraternities or other like finance feeder clubs, it's actually pretty hard to break in, right? Like
Hmm.
most of the students at Cal that are breaking into banking, at least at the top banks, come from like the Delta Sigma Pi's and the Alpha Kappa Psi's of the world, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And so it's like it's kind of like if you can get into those organizations, you have a lot of resources, and also a lot of their alumni are working at these firms already, and so it's a lot easier to network and get interviews and so on and so forth. Like I know, for example, Delta Sigma Pi, which is the business fraternity, like they just have like a complete like stronghold on like Goldman TMT in the San Francisco office because like
Hmm.
all of their alumni go there and they just keep
Yeah.
hiring their own people, right?
Yeah.
But like if you're not from DSP, like they probably aren't really going to help you, and then it's kind of an uphill battle, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly. That's exactly how I would put it. That, and I'm not in Haas. Like I said earlier, my GPA wasn't the strongest because I started off exploring computer science as well. So like there was a lot of things that were like not really going for me. And so I did have to like go through a lot of different resources, go and find like, and that's why, you know, the process did take me a pretty
Yeah.
long time, but I mean, at the end, it did work out the way I wanted it to. And so I'm really happy about that.
Yeah, and I guess I was going to ask you, I was gonna next going to ask you like, why did you decide to join something like Wall Street Mastermind? But I feel like we probably kind of inadvertently just answered that question already, which is you're not in these clubs, you're not in Haas, you're not in a business school, you don't have a lot of resources that a lot of these other students on campus have, and they're basically your primary competition, right? Like even for on campus recruiting, like that's who you're going up against. And so, was it just as simple as, hey, I'm just looking for someone or some program to kind of like level the playing field for me and give me those resources that I'm lacking? Or like, was there anything else that kind of went into your decision making process when you were deciding whether to join this program or not? Because like not obviously not everyone joins a program like Wall Street Mastermind, right? Like we've been
Mhm.
around for you were actually you're probably one of the OGs, I guess, at this point, but
Yeah.
we've been around for like 3+ years. And I think even as of today, you know, we've only worked with like 450 plus students, which is not a lot in my opinion.
Mhm.
So like was this like an easy decision for you? Was it kind of difficult? Were you like kind of on the fence and not really sure if it's the right decision, or like what was your thought process at the time if you still recall?
Yeah, I mean, it was still something I had to like consider, right? I wasn't just saying like, okay, I'll take like any sort of assistance I can get. Like there was obviously things I had to go into consideration before joining a program. But I was thinking about it. I was like, you know, I have like school that I still have to like commit to. I can't just like drop everything and just pursue like this whole recruitment process 24/7. You know, school is still taking up a lot of my time. I had some extracurriculars that weren't finance related, but like I still have to put time into that. And so I was like, if I have all those things, how much time do I have really to like set aside each day or each week to prepare for the recruiting cycle? And on top of that, I don't have like the resources like I mentioned. And so if I had to spend all that extra time to figure things out, it's well, how long is it going to take me to, you know, get to where I want to be? I don't know. It might be months, years, or it could be never. And so I was like, you know, that pretty much convinced me to say this probably would be helpful. And you know, I was on the call with like you and some other people, and you guys kind of explained how the program would work, and all the things that I would be gaining. And so it sounded like something that could really help me and kind of accelerate like my learning process throughout the whole thing.
So it sounds like your biggest concern at the time was how can I accelerate this process, this preparation process as much as possible? And how can I, it's almost like buying more time because you're so busy as a student, like
Hmm.
recruiting, especially for like now that you're on the other side in hindsight and you think about it, it's like recruiting is almost like a part-time, if not full-time job in and of
Yeah,
itself.
yeah.
And you're also a full-time student who has classes and you're trying to keep your grades up and you maybe have extracurricular activities and you got to do internships to build your resume and
Hmm.
you got to network with bankers and prep
Yeah,
for interviews. And so when you add all these things together, it's like you only have 24 hours in a day.
yeah.
And so you have to figure out a way to juggle all these things and not just do them, but do them well.
Yeah, exactly. And like, if I remember, I think I joined back in like November, December, and I know that at least at Berkeley, a lot of people, know that they want to go into banking like freshman year or like very early on sophomore year, and I didn't really know about it until like towards the end or at least the middle, and again, I didn't have like a network of people I could just reach out to and say like, hey, I'm interested in banking. Can you kind of like help me out, or basically people that are already in banking. And so I had to do everything from scratch. Like there wasn't people I had, like I didn't have like warm connections at these banks. I had to, everyone that I reached out to was like a cold connection. And so basically starting off like a little bit later than other people and
Yeah.
not having like the resources and the network to be able to get to where I want to be was like it like scared me, because I didn't have, it seemed like I didn't have that much time, especially since the whole process, they started so early. And so I was like, it was feel like I was racing against time to like be on the same page as everyone else.
Right. I mean, you joined November of sophomore year. That was probably, I think, right around the time, or maybe right before when a lot of the junior summer internship applications started opening up for you. Right.
Yeah. And I think like some of them are even already open. Like I know, like for example, RBC always opens their thing like super early, and
Right.
so there's definitely like places that were already recruiting and whatnot. And so I definitely felt like I was pretty late to the game, so to speak. And so I needed something to like get me to catch up.
Did you have like any finance experience on your resume already at the time, or like when you joined Wall Street Mastermind? What was your resume like? Was it like no finance experience at all, or maybe you had a couple internships, or what
Yeah, no,
shape?
there was like zero finance experience on there. I think I mentioned it in the beginning. I was like I had more of a marketing background. I did marketing internship my freshman year, and I was part of a consulting club that was like more creative marketing focused. So, if you looked at my resume just from that, it was like, this kid is probably not interested in banking whatsoever. Like this, like if anything, it would be like more consulting than banking. So, but most likely it would look like I was pursuing marketing or something like that. And so, I had to really pivot myself to like pursue this finance thing.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. So let's talk about like, I think it makes a lot of sense why you decided to join Wall Street Mastermind. Then like after you joined, what were the things that you did inside of Wall Street Mastermind? And like, did you find it to be helpful or not? Like, cause I think the number one question that a lot of people have when they're looking at a program like this is like, from the outside looking in, it's natural to wonder like, well, what's the difference? Like, what's the difference between doing something like this versus just trying to figure everything out on my own, right? 'Cause,
Hmm.
like that's usually the decision people are trying to weigh between like, should I get help or should I try to do this on my own? So like, what do you think was, what do you think was like helpful to you? And were there things that you did in the program where you're like, you know what, having been through it in hindsight, like there's no way I could have done that on my own. Like, is there anything like that?
Yeah, no, it's like, when if you were to go through, I'm not saying it's impossible to like do it on your own. I'm sure there's definitely people who have. But again, with like the time constraints and whatnot, I think just reading these guides and all these things, or like even watching like some sort of basic videos on YouTube or something, isn't enough to really teach you everything you need to know about like the whole recruitment process. Because the recruitment process is not just like knowing your technicals and stuff. It's like behaviors as well, of being able to like sell yourself to the interviewer, knowing how to effectively network with people and kind of get your foot in the door. Those are all things that are almost just as important, if not more important than like the technicals itself. And so having like everything in one sort of program is like was super helpful for me. And then I think I mentioned earlier, I'm not really someone who like is able to learn something by reading it. Like if I were to read a textbook, I probably wouldn't retain that all that information. So it wasn't like the guides weren't really doing it for me. And so when you have like a video or something where someone's like writing out how to do something or explaining a concept through a video and kind of like drawing something out while on the side, that to me is like a lot more helpful because I can visualize how it actually works and
Mm,
stuff like that. And so that was something I don't think you could really get outside of the program.
got it. So basically, what you're talking about is like understanding yourself well enough to know like what is your mode of learning, I guess, like what's most effective for you, because everybody learns differently. But I would say for most people, they're probably in the same category as you, which is like I find myself to be the same way. Like, sure, I can read stuff, but um, if you're only reading about something, it's just not the same as having another person actually like physically teach you something and explain
Hmm.
the concept and draw it out on a whiteboard and answer your questions and having a back and forth, and like it's a lot more interactive, and it's the equivalent of like you going to lecture and learning from a professor, or you going to like section and asking questions to your TA and going to office hours and asking questions versus, or alternatively, you just buying a really, really dense textbook and reading the
Yeah.
book on your own in your dorm and never going to class, right? Like,
Mhm.
I think most people will find the first way a lot more effective in terms of like learning and retaining the information than just like trying to teach yourself something that you don't fully understand yet.
Yeah, exactly. And like when you're when I if you like when I was reading that stuff, I had no idea about this anything about like banking or like accounting, valuation, anything like that. And so I was reading it, and these things basically made zero sense to me. And it was like, yeah, they kind of introduced the topic a little bit, but it still wasn't like making much sense to me. And so like having someone explain it to you as if you're like a kid or like a fifth grader
Yeah.
helps a lot for someone who has no finance background
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And so
Yeah.
that was something that also really helped.
That's great, man. And then I guess like the other thing you mentioned too was obviously coming into the program, you didn't have any relevant finance experience. And then like the applications are already opening up like right around that time. And so obviously I think you didn't have a lot of time to go out and build your resume, right? So like
Mhm.
what did you do on that front? Like, and how did you go about getting the experiences that you need? Because obviously, over time you were able to build it up gradually and get more relevant experience. And, um, but like, what was that process like?
Yeah. So before I joined the program, I wasn't really like plugged into the whole like banking community or whatever you want to call it. So I didn't know how to get like these in semester internships or these like pre-junior summer analyst internships, or however you want to call it, like your sophomore summer, for example. I
Mm,
didn't know how to get those, or like and I didn't know like what I should be looking for and stuff like that. And so I was kind of just um, again, I was like pretty lost in that whole process. And then, when I joined the program, they broke it down to like a pretty structured way, saying like, oh, you need to, reach out like to some boutiques because these maybe larger banks really don't take sophomores. And so, figuring out who to target, who to reach out to, and like kind of how to go about, asking for like a position during the semester or the summer was really helpful to me, and that gave me my first relevant experience on my resume, and that was my sophomore summer, and it was like remote, and I wasn't. I mean, albeit like as a sophomore, you're probably not doing much like nothing super crazy important or like important or anything like that, but it was still something, right? And it definitely did help. It gave me something to talk about during my interviews, like, and it was better than nothing at the end of the day.
Was that like a small boutique bank or like what kind of internship was it?
Yeah, it was like a small boutique bank. It wasn't like M&A. It was like capital raising. And so they worked with like debt and equity advisory. And so I, it was something like kind of related to banking. You know, that they did some like similar things, and so it was helpful in that sense. And I was definitely able to kind of talk about it when I was going through like networking calls or like interviews and whatnot. And so I would say that was pretty crucial to like when it came to
Yeah.
getting my foot in the door when I was talking to like these bankers.
Yeah. So you sound like you came in, you learned how to I mean you fixed up your resume and all that. You learned how to network effectively. You use those skills to go out and network your way into a sophomore summer internship. And then obviously from there you continue to recruit to try to get that junior summer internship. But at this point, we're talking, you're at the end of your sophomore summer, right? You have this internship under your belt going into junior year. Um, Most of the like bulge bracket and elite boutique firms at that point are pretty much done with their hiring for the junior summer internships, right? Like that's how early things happen now. Like
Hmm.
if you're going to junior year and still recruiting, a lot of these top firms are pretty much they've already filled their class, right? Was that your
Yeah,
experience as well? Okay.
yeah, yeah. And I had like a few interviews like prior to that, like prior to the summer. Like
Yeah.
I guess I was just like that was through like the networking that I had learned how to do through the program. And but at that point, like my technicals weren't sound enough. I remember like my first interview, it was like I spent like 20 minutes on this one accounting question, and it was like the most terrible thing I've ever done. And it really sucked. And obviously I never heard back. And so like from that point on, I like really just sat myself down there for a couple hours a day and just really try to learn the technicals as well as I could, kind of like learn the ins and outs of it. And it's definitely, it took me a while to like pick it up. And I wouldn't say I'm like technically like perfect even now, but I from now and like looking back, like comparing myself now and back then, like there's a huge improvement in terms of like what I know and like how I'm able to like I deliver my responses and whatnot.
Yeah, I'm sure. And so obviously given that timeline, given you kind of like we're starting halfway through sophomore year with no finance experience, and obviously took you a little bit of time to like kind of build that up. Um, like by the time you were able to successfully finish recruiting for junior summer internships, like you ended up at what, like more of a middle market bank? Is that right?
Yeah, I'd say it's like lower middle market slash middle market. So they do a little bit of both, like, depending on just kind of like what kind of deal flow comes in.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like anything like that you see on like the when you Google like list of investment banks. That it wasn't one of those banks that would pop up, but it was still like something that I was pretty happy with at the time. Like it was something that I knew would give me like pretty good experience. I'd be working on like deals, like hands have like a lot of hands-on experience, and it was like a pretty small team, well within like the group that I was in at least. And so I was, this past summer I did get that experience that I wanted, and I learned a lot. And I think when I came to full-time recruiting, that was what most people asked about during those interviews. They were like, okay, can you like tell me about what you did here? Like tell me about this transaction that you worked on. And I was
Sure.
able to talk about it pretty intelligently because, I was really actually involved in the whole like uh, process while I was an intern there.
Yep. Got it. Um, I guess since not everyone goes through both the summer and the full time recruiting process, and you did, um, can you kind of shed some light on any differences between the junior summer internship process versus the full time recruiting process? Like, did you find one to be harder than the other? Are there other things that you think are noteworthy for people who are maybe considering going through both or not going through both? Like maybe they're trying to decide if they should go through full time recruiting. Like, what are some things that you would want to share with people?
Yeah. My opinion might be a little bit different than other people's. I think for me, people say like full-time recruiting is like harder just because there's like limited spots. And they're probably going to be like dig in more technically on you, and because they expect you to know a little bit more, which I think is somewhat true. depending on like the bank you're interviewing for. But in my experience, at least, like, full-time recruiting wasn't actually too bad. That's where I got like most. I had a handful of offers like when it came to full-time recruiting. It wasn't like I only had one that, that was the only one I could choose from. I had like multiple that that they extended offers to me, and I was able to choose from them and like weigh the pros and cons of each of them and kind of make a decision as to like where I want to go. And so for me at least, I think full-time recruiting wasn't as bad as people had said it was, but I think that's also because I was able to like get a lot of experience under my resume. I was able to like study these technicals over an extended period of time, so it wasn't like I was giving them any reason to like not extend an offer. Like I was like doing everything I could, like everything I could control, was at least, I was able to do so.
Yeah, I think there's definitely fewer spots for full time because obviously most of the offers have been given to returning summer interns. So that's a fact, right? But I guess there are also fewer people recruiting for full time because a lot of people just go back to the bank that they already interned at, right?
Hmm.
But I think like more importantly, whether full time is going to be easier or harder for you, I think goes back to what you said, which is like, did you get any like real substantial work over the summer? And did you like do a good job, and are you able to talk about the work that you had in an intelligent manner, right? And
Hmm.
that sounds really simple, but I think it's easier said than done. Like a lot of people go through an internship and they're just going through the motions, or like sometimes you're so busy and you have so much work during the summer and you're just worried about getting things out and getting it done on time, and you're not really spending the time to like slow down and digest what you're doing and think about how you want to discuss your roles and responsibility to
Yeah.
a future interviewer, right? And so it's like when that happens, if people start asking you about your resume, which they're always going to do that, especially if you had an investment banking internship, like that's what they're going to ask you about. Like if you start, sounding like you're very unsure of yourself, or you don't know what you did, or you can't answer basic questions about a deal that you say you supposedly worked on, then very quickly you're going to lose any credibility that you might have had, and people are
Yeah.
probably not going to give you any credit for having done that internship,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So I
No.
think that's more of the challenge is just like, do you know how to talk about the work that you did, assuming you're able to at least get an internship that's relevant, like even if it's not at like the best bank or whatever, like, at least you were still doing banking.
Hmm.
Of course, if like for people that couldn't even get a banking internship over the summer, then that's even harder because then you end up competing against other people like you who did do a summer internship in banking, and obviously like the person that did do a summer internship is going to have more relevant things to talk about than the person who didn't,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
So I would say like for those of you that if you're recruiting for a summer internship and maybe you miss out on the bulge bracket and boutique banks, it's not time to give up. Like the next best thing you could do is like still trying to get into either a middle market bank or a lower middle market bank or a regional boutique bank, like whatever, like just like the best bank that you could possibly get into, so that you at least still have that relevant experience for the summer. And then of course you can always recruit again for full time, right? And then
Hmm.
just need to tweak the way that you study for that interview a little bit, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I would say that's like it's not always like the worst thing to like be working at a smaller bank because like if it's like a somewhat reputable bank and maybe they don't have enough like people there, you're gonna get like a lot more exposure to whatever deal it is that they're working on at any given time, and that ultimately benefits you. But, like, that was the case for me. I was able to work pretty heavily on like certain deals, and I was able to like talk about those in my interviews, and it was able to show I was able to show that when I was like having my interviews and stuff. And so I wouldn't say, yeah, like you had said, it's not like if you don't get like a bulge bracket or whatever, like your junior summer, it's not like the end of everything. Like you still have a pretty good shot at getting into banking.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I think some people definitely give up too early. They're like, "Oh, I didn't get in Goldman Sachs. I guess, banking's not for me." It's like, well,
Yeah.
you know, it's not that easy, right? And
Hmm.
a lot of times it's just like, are you the last man standing type of thing?
Yeah.
It's like Squid Games,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like more of a, and they always say it's like a marathon, not a sprint. And so,
Right.
you're able to like push through it and, take the time and be patient with a lot of things. And I think at the end of the day, if you like work hard enough for it, it'll like everything will kind of sort of come together and work in your favor.
So what was like full-time recruiting like for you then? Like when did you actively start recruiting for full-time and like, how many interviews did you go through and like what was the offer that you got at the end? Can we kind of just give people like a high level breakdown?
Yeah, so I started recruiting for full time, I guess, towards like the latter half of my junior summer. And I was working in person, so it wasn't like the easiest thing to do like at the time. Taking on these like calls and stuff. I had to step out of the office for like 20 minutes at a time, just to like have a real quick phone call,
Wow.
like once or twice a week. It wasn't like it's like not be like discreet about it, but it's something, it's doable if you kind of like do it correctly or like do it properly. Just don't make it like super obvious.
Right.
But that's how I first started it. Reaching out to like old connections I had made when I was recruiting for summer. Going like, hey, I'm going through the full time process right now. I was wondering like where you guys are in that process, and kind of having a quick phone call to catch up. Whatever you guys have missed out on like the past couple months, talk about that, and then sooner or later, like I guess beginning of my senior year, I guess like the first month or two, that's when I started getting a lot of interviews, and I think it's pretty similar to like what you would see in a summer analyst interview. You have like your behaviorals, you have like the walk me through this portion of your resume, tell me about what you did this past summer. But I'd say technicals probably expect you to know a little bit more than a summer analyst would, just because you had an extra year or whatever to like prepare for this. And so I would probably be a little more prepared for the technicals aspect of things, but I wouldn't say it's like that much harder to the point where like it's not something you can, it's something you can still like figure out. It's just like it might take a little bit more studying.
Yeah, got it. And so obviously you ended up doing well in at least some of the interviews because you got an offer. So like what was the ultimate outcome in the end for you? Like where was your offer from?
Mhm. Yeah, so I ended up receiving three offers from various firms, and they were all. I was pretty interested in tech banking, so they're all tech banks, well, at least tech groups of certain banks. And so I ended up at accepting my offer at Barclays in San Francisco in the tech team.
Got
And yeah, after that, I still had like a lot of super days lined up, and I just told them, sorry, I'm no longer going to be in that process. And so I think everything did work out for me at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, once you get an offer like that, Bulge Bracket Bank in the industry coverage group that you want, it's totally fine to just stop recruiting as long as like it's an offer that you're happy with, right? And
Mhm.
that's a great offer. So
Yeah.
um, that's great, man. That's awesome. So I guess, now that you're on the other side of this process, I think we can wrap up with this question, which is like, was there any like singular piece of advice? It doesn't have to be singular. Was there any advice that you got from people that just really helped you along the way where it was like, I don't know, maybe change something for you or made things a lot easier? Like, is there anything like that that you want to pass on to other people who are maybe just starting to go through the process now? Um, like, people like you were in their shoes not too long ago. Like, anything you want to tell them?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure like a lot of people say things, the things that I'm gonna say, but one thing I definitely want to tell people is that it if you think that you're not the strongest candidate, if you think your GPA is not good enough, you don't have enough experience, right, or you don't have like you're just not as better off as other people are in terms of like the preparation process. I would say that that's not something that should like discourage you from pursuing banking, because that was my situation, and I was definitely extremely underprepared. But with enough like if you put enough work into it and you have the proper resources like this program, for example, like everything will ultimately work out. And I'd say, yeah, there was plenty of times where I wanted to give up, when I was recruiting. It was just like not working at some times. But when the more interviews you do, the more mock interviews, and the more you study, the easier it'll become. The more phone calls you have, like when it comes to networking and stuff. it'll be easier. And I'd say, yeah, there's like a lot of things that I want to tell people, but like, it's I'd say again, it's like not a sprint, it's a marathon. So like if, for example, your first interview goes really poorly, I wouldn't let that stop you from, going through the whole recruitment process, because everyone starts somewhere. I started off really, really badly. Like I said, my first interview, I spent almost 70% of the interview doing one accounting question. And so it was pretty embarrassing, but it all worked out at the end. And so it's just, as long as you get better at whatever you're lacking in every single day, then it should ultimately work out.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great advice, man. And we joked about the Squid Games analogy earlier, but I really think there's a lot of that to this, right? It's
Yeah.
like almost like a survival game and just trying to outlast the other people. But guys, look, if you're listening to this and you're finding yourself in a similar situation where maybe you're starting a little bit later, or maybe, you're not in all the feeder clubs on campus, or maybe you just like the current resources that everyone's telling you to use, like the interview guides and whatnot, like you've tried it and it just isn't really working that well for you. Or maybe you don't have any like relevant experience on your resume, you don't know how to go about getting them, like whatever the case may be, or you have like some limiting beliefs around why you are not good enough to make it into banking. Like, um, you probably are good enough to get to make into banking, but you just have to like find a way to get the help that you need so that you can overcome these obstacles. Like, there's always going to be obstacles along the way, especially when you're trying to get to something that's as desirable as banking, right? Like, a lot of people want these jobs. That's why it's hard, right? And nothing good comes easy, right? And so, don't be discouraged. Don't give up too easily. Like, you just have to figure out a way to cross the finish line. It's just like, um, have that like really strong will to survive the process almost,
Mhm. Yeah.
so like if that's you and you're looking for that type of help, feel free to reach out to us. I've been joking with people. It's like, in the Squid Games, there was that doctor that was like finding out what all the games were going to be before he had to play it, and that was like a huge advantage, right? It's like I feel like that's kind of what we do for our students that we work with. Is like we help you by showing you all the things that you have to expect, and then like once you know what to expect, then it becomes a lot easier because you're not going in blind, right? And so if you guys are interested in that type of help, like, you can reach out to us, and you can actually, what you can do now is like before you even talk to our team, you can actually schedule a free virtual coffee chat to speak with one of our alumni who's already successfully recruited and gone through the program, and who's just like an upperclassman who's done with recruiting now, and they're happy to just get on a networking call with you, share whatever advice they have for you. You can also ask them any questions you have about recruiting, or if you want to ask them questions about Wall Street Mastermind and whatnot. And then, like, after that conversation, if you still want to talk to our team and you think this is something that could potentially help you, then they'll be happy to like introduce you to us and help you set that up. Or if you talk to them and say, "Oh, actually, okay, I got everything I need and I can figure all this out on my own," then great. Then you can go and do that on your own, and like it's all good, right? And so either way, like we're here to help. And so if you're interested in doing that, we're setting up that initial virtual coffee chat with one of our alumni. Then you can go to www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. The street is abbreviated to ST, so it's wallstmastermind.com/apply. And we look forward to speaking with you and then just helping you in whatever way that we can. All right. So, um, with that said, Stephen, I want to thank you again for taking the time to talk to us today. I think this was super helpful, and it's always great for people to hear stories from other people who are going through like a similar process that they're going through now, maybe experiencing a lot of the same challenges and obstacles. And then seeing like a lot of times all it takes is that belief, like seeing like, hey, Stephen was able to do it. And that means that I have hope and I should be able to do it as well, right? So I really appreciate you for taking the time to come on here and talk to people about your experience. Obviously, huge congrats to you again on getting into a really, really great firm. Barclays is, obviously a bulge bracket bank, and really excited for you and looking forward to seeing all the success that you have ahead of you for the rest of your career, really. So
Yeah, yeah. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, I just wanted to say again that like, you know, I was a student that like saw a lot of different challenges when it came to the recruiting process, and the program really helped me out. And so I hope if anyone does, if like a non-target, low GPA, anything like that, no experience, anything like that, I'm pretty sure I've like experienced the majority of those things as well. And I was able to, make it through the whole process. And so, if anyone does, have those concerns, I think this is a great place for them to kind of be and to kind of start off their preparation process.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's we can end on that note. And guys, thank you guys for tuning in. And hopefully this was helpful to you guys. And as always, we'll be back with more of these for you guys in the near future. And until then, we'll talk to you soon. All right. Bye.